She walked into the interview with 6 years of experience, flawless recommendations, and a 5-year-old daughter clutching a unicorn backpack. 10 minutes later, she was out the door, rejected with a single sentence. "We don't hire single mothers." What she didn't know was that the man who stepped into the elevator at that exact moment, a 35-year-old millionaire CEO with piercing brown eyes, was about to turn her humiliation into the most shocking and life-changing opportunity of her life. Grace Miller had always been punctual, sometimes painfully so, and on that particular Tuesday morning, she arrived 20 minutes early for her interview. She carried a neatly pressed resume in her bag, and holding her hand was 5-year-old Lily, clutching a small pink backpack covered in glittery unicorns. Inside were markers, a coloring book, and a packet of gummy bears. The kind of makeshift survival kit only a single mother on a tight schedule would think to prepare. Grace had rehearsed every possible interview question the night before, practicing in the mirror until her voice grew hoarse, but nothing could prepare her for the exhaustion that came from balancing professionalism with parenthood. At the front desk, the receptionist cast a doubtful glance at Lily, who was tugging at the straps of her backpack. "I'm afraid children aren't allowed beyond this point," the woman said crisply, with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Grace forced her own polite smile in return. "She'll sit right here quietly," Grace explained, crouching down to stroke Lily's blonde hair. "I don't have anyone to leave her with today." The receptionist arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, as if she had already judged and dismissed them both. Grace ignored the sting in her chest and tried to focus on breathing evenly. She smoothed down her blouse, straightened her skirt, and reminded herself, "This is just another door. Keep knocking." By the time she was ushered into a sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 15th floor, her palms were damp. The room was cold, almost surgical in its tidiness, and the skyline of the city loomed through the windows like a wall of giants watching her. Sitting opposite her was a man in a tailored gray suit, his tie knotted with military precision. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he flipped through her resume with the indifference of someone reading a grocery list. "So, Grace Miller," he said finally, not looking up, "6 years in data analytics, a handful of successful product launches. On paper, you're solid." She straightened in her chair, grateful to finally be talking about her work. "Yes, I focused on developing churn prediction models. My last dashboard helped reduce client loss by—" He cut her off. "Are you a single mother?" The question landed like a slap. Grace froze, her carefully rehearsed pitch scattering into silence. "Yes," she admitted softly, her throat tightening. The man sighed, closing the folder with a deliberate snap. "I'm afraid that's going to be a problem. We require flexibility. Late nights, last-minute travel. It's a very dynamic environment. Our people must be fully available." Grace felt her stomach drop, but she managed to keep her face composed. "I can be flexible," she said quickly. "I have support systems, and I—" He shook his head, already pushing her resume into a neat pile labeled "No." "It's not personal. It's just reality. Thank you for your time." And just like that, the interview was over. No questions about her skills, no discussion about her ideas, no curiosity about what she might bring to the team. Just one label, "Mother," stamped across her application like a warning sign. When Grace stepped out into the hallway, the air felt heavier, her steps dragging as if she were walking through water. Lily looked up from where she had been swinging her legs on the lobby chair. "Mom, are we going home?" Grace forced a smile, blinking back the sting in her eyes. She knelt in front of her daughter, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." But inside, as she tightened her grip on Lily's small hand, a different voice whispered, "This can't be the end. Not like this. Not today." And though Grace didn't yet know it, someone else was about to hear that same silent plea. Someone who had the power to change everything. Grace stood in the hallway, holding Lily's hand a little too tightly, trying to keep her voice steady as she waited for the elevator. The glass doors reflected her pale face, the fatigue beneath her eyes, and the forced smile she gave her daughter. She hated that Lily had to see her like this, defeated before she even had a chance to prove herself. Lily leaned against her leg, humming to herself, fiddling with the unicorn zipper on her backpack, as though it was the only thing keeping the day from unraveling. When the elevator finally chimed and the doors slid open, Grace stepped forward, but her breath caught. Stepping out was a man who looked as though he had walked straight from the cover of a business magazine. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair combed neatly back and warm brown eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. His suit was cut to perfection, the kind that said power without trying too hard. He carried no briefcase, only a phone in one hand, but his presence filled the corridor like a sudden change in weather. He slowed as he passed, his gaze landing not on Grace at first, but on Lily. A smile flickered across his face, not the kind adults give out of politeness, but a genuine one that reached his eyes. "That's a brave-looking backpack," he said in a low, steady voice. Lily's cheeks flushed with pride as she clutched the unicorn tighter. "It's not just a backpack," she answered with the blunt honesty only a child could manage. "It's a unicorn. It protects me." The man crouched slightly so that he was at Lily's level, his eyes softening even further. "Does it really? Well, then it must be a strong unicorn because you look very safe to me." Then he straightened, his attention shifting to Grace. For a moment, Grace wasn't sure she could hold his gaze. There was something piercing but kind in those eyes, as if he could read the weight she was carrying without her saying a word. She swallowed hard and tried to keep her tone light. "Tough day," she murmured, almost laughing, though it came out broken. He tilted his head slightly. "You look like someone who just walked out of a room where she wasn't heard." Grace blinked at him, startled by his accuracy. She let out a shaky breath and admitted the truth, though it felt risky to say it aloud. "They didn't hire me. Because I'm a mom." Her voice cracked on the last word, the rawness slipping out before she could stop it. Silence followed, the kind of silence that made Grace wish she could take the words back, as if confessing weakness to a stranger was a mistake. But instead of pity or polite dismissal, she saw something flash across his face. A tightening of the jaw, a flicker of anger, and then resolve. He pulled out his phone and began typing quickly, his brow furrowed. Grace shifted uneasily, hugging Lily closer, thinking she should probably excuse herself and leave. But then he looked up, his voice steady, his tone carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Ethan Carter," he said simply. "CEO." Grace blinked, the word hanging between them. CEO. It didn't register right away. It felt surreal, absurd even. She laughed nervously, convinced he must be joking. But he wasn't smiling. His brown eyes were sharp now, full of intention. "It looks like someone in my company forgot the most important rule. Talent doesn't vanish because someone has a child. Sometimes it grows stronger because of it." He slipped his phone back into his pocket and gestured toward the conference rooms. "Do you have 10 more minutes?" Grace froze, unsure if this was a trap, some strange test. "10 minutes for what?" she asked cautiously. "For a real interview," he said, his lips curving into a faint but determined smile. "One where your resume is more important than your circumstances. Come back with me." She wanted to say no, to protect herself from disappointment, to shield Lily from another invisible door slamming shut. But the way he spoke, calm, assured, as though he already knew she was worth fighting for, stirred something inside her that had nearly gone numb after years of rejection. She looked down at Lily, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. The little girl gave her mother's hand a squeeze, then whispered, "The unicorn says we can trust him." And somehow in that moment, Grace believed it too. Grace felt her heart pounding as she followed Ethan back through the polished corridors she had just walked moments ago in defeat. Everything looked different now. The glass walls, the sleek furniture, even the company's logo glinting in silver letters on the wall. A few employees glanced up as they passed, whispering to each other. It was obvious that Ethan Carter wasn't just another executive. People straightened when he entered a room, like gravity itself shifted around him. He opened the same glass door she had exited not 15 minutes earlier. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Instead of one disinterested interviewer, 3 new figures sat at the long table. The HR director, a stern-looking woman in her 50s with sharp glasses. The head of product, a younger man tapping a pen nervously against a notepad. And the company's legal advisor, flipping through documents with a frown. The original interviewer, the man with the perfect tie knot, sat stiffly at the far end, his face pale with confusion. Ethan didn't take a seat. Instead, he walked straight to the whiteboard at the front of the room, uncapped a marker, and in bold, confident strokes wrote, "Results greater than bias." The squeak of the marker echoed in the silence. Then he turned, his presence filling the space. "Grace Miller," he said, his voice steady, "has 6 years of experience in data analytics. She's launched 3 successful projects, all measurable, all profitable. Her track record is stronger than half the candidates we've interviewed this quarter." He looked directly at the HR director, then the product head. "Can anyone here explain why her resume was pushed aside?" The man with the tie cleared his throat, his fingers twitching nervously. "With all respect, I conducted the interview myself. I considered the realities of the role. We require someone with total availability, someone who can handle overtime, unexpected travel. It's a fast-paced environment and—" "Fast-paced," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharpening. "Fast-paced doesn't mean exclusive. It doesn't mean shutting doors on capable professionals because they happen to raise children. Do you think problems wait for people without families to solve them? Do you believe brilliance only comes from someone unburdened by life?" The room fell still. No one answered. Ethan turned back to Grace, his expression softer now. "Here's what I'm proposing. You take on a 1-week trial project, paid. You work in the way that suits you best, flexible hours, remote if needed. At the end of the week, if your results are what I believe they will be, you get the official offer." He paused, then glanced at the HR director. "And another thing. By next Monday, I want a pilot childcare space in this building. A kids' corner. Books, mats, toys, supervised care. If we are serious about supporting talent, then we provide an environment where talent can thrive, no matter their parental status. I will personally allocate the budget." The HR director opened her mouth to argue, but Ethan raised his hand, cutting her off before a word could form. "This is not up for debate. Our company culture is not defined by convenience. It is defined by principle." Grace's throat tightened. She could hardly breathe, let alone speak. A part of her wanted to pinch herself, to make sure she wasn't imagining the sudden shift from humiliation to hope. Her eyes burned, but she held her chin high. She didn't want pity, she wanted respect. And for the first time in years, someone was offering it to her. The legal advisor adjusted his glasses, studying Grace with a new kind of interest, as though he were trying to reconcile the words on her resume with the woman standing tall before them now. The head of product nodded slightly, impressed despite himself. The man with the tie shrank lower in his seat. His earlier smugness evaporated. Ethan uncapped the marker again and underlined the words on the board with a single, deliberate stroke. "Results are what matter," he said quietly, but with finality. Then he capped the marker and set it down with a soft click. Grace inhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. For the first time all day, she felt seen. Not as a liability, not as a single mother dragging a child into an office lobby, but as a professional with value. She glanced at the reflection in the glass wall, at her own figure standing there with Lily's unicorn backpack slung over her shoulder, and for a brief, dizzying moment, she believed again in the possibility of doors staying open. The meeting wasn't long after that. Formalities were exchanged, dates were set, and when Grace finally stepped back out into the hallway, Lily ran up to her with wide eyes. "Mom, what happened?" Grace knelt and pulled her close, whispering so only her daughter could hear. "Something incredible, sweetheart. Someone decided to listen." And though Grace could not yet see the road ahead, she knew in her bones that everything had just shifted, because a man with brown eyes and the authority to change the rules had chosen not to look away. At home that evening, Grace transformed her small kitchen into something that looked less like a place to cook and more like a command center. The dining table was buried under open notebooks, sticky notes covered in half-scribbled formulas, and the glowing screen of her aging laptop. The refrigerator hummed in the background, while Lily sat nearby with her crayons, drawing colorful towers and rainbows on construction paper. Every so often, she would glance up at her mother, as if silently reminding her that this fight was for both of them. The trial project was simple in words but brutal in execution. Build a prototype dashboard that could predict customer churn and present it in a way that executives could understand in one glance. Grace knew the technical side was within her reach. She'd spent years in analytics, and raw data never intimidated her. What frightened her was the pressure of time. 1 week, one chance, no second attempt. She worked late into the night, the quiet only broken by the clatter of her fingers on the keyboard and the occasional soft cough from Lily's room. When the graphs finally began to take shape, she let herself smile. She built a system that didn't just analyze churn after it happened, but spotted the early signs of risk. A drop in logins, hesitation in checkout flows, the subtle shifts that told the truth long before customers officially left. It was data, yes, but to Grace it felt like telling a story, one she knew how to read better than anyone else. By the third day, fatigue had settled into her bones. She brewed another pot of coffee, dark and bitter, and promised herself just 30 more minutes of work. 30 minutes became 3 hours. When she finally stumbled to bed, dawn was already pushing pale light through the curtains. But despite the exhaustion, there was a small flame inside her that refused to go out. She wasn't just coding or modeling. She was fighting for her place, for her dignity, for the future Lily deserved. On the sixth day, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Show it Monday at 10 a.m. P.S. Kids Corner, almost ready. Grace stared at the words for a long time. It wasn't just the invitation. It was the casual certainty with which he assumed she belonged there, as though it was obvious all along. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she had missed hearing someone speak about her with confidence instead of doubt. Monday morning arrived like a test she had been preparing for her whole life. Grace wore her best blazer, the one she had kept pressed even during the hardest months when she barely had interviews at all. She braided Lily's hair with careful hands, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Today, we show them what we can do." When they arrived at the office, Grace was stunned. Where there had once been only sterile white walls and cold glass, there was now a bright room filled with puzzle mats, shelves stacked with children's books, and bins of toys. A colorful sign hung above the door. Kid Corner. Lily gasped, her eyes wide with wonder, and ran to the wooden blocks stacked neatly in the corner. Grace stood frozen, her throat tightening. This wasn't symbolic. It was real. Someone had listened. Someone had acted. With Lily happily distracted, Grace walked into the conference room where the team awaited her. Her hands trembled only slightly as she connected her laptop to the large screen. The room was quiet, expectant. She drew in a deep breath, remembered every late night at her kitchen table, and began. The presentation was crisp, measured. First, the problem, customer churn eating into long-term growth. Next, the solution, her model, trained to detect subtle warning signs. Then the prototype dashboard, clean and intuitive, translating thousands of rows of data into a single glance that any executive could understand. Finally, she revealed the test results from the pilot dataset. The room leaned forward as the graph appeared, the churn line dipping downward. 14% reduction, Grace said steadily, not because of luck, not because of guesswork, because the patterns are there if you know how to see them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Grace's pulse roared in her ears. Then Ethan, standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, gave a single nod. "It's not just good," he said, his voice even. "It's exactly what we need." The tension in Grace's chest released all at once, and she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, she felt the weight of her work recognized without excuses or apologies. And in that moment, she realized that this week hadn't just been about proving herself to a company. It had been about proving to herself that she still had the strength to rise after every closed door. When the meeting ended, she slipped quietly into the kid corner, where Lily was building a tower of blocks taller than her head. The little girl beamed when she saw her mother. "Look, Mom!" "It's not falling." Grace crouched down, hugging her daughter close. "Neither are we," she whispered. Grace woke the next morning to the shrill buzz of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. For a few precious seconds, in that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, she thought maybe it was a simple calendar reminder or a message from her sister. But when she reached for it and her eyes adjusted to the glow of the screen, her stomach dropped. Notifications were spilling down the lock screen one after another. Emails, text messages, pings from social media accounts she hadn't checked in months. The headlines hit her like waves crashing too fast to breathe. Millionaire CEO uses single mom for PR stunt. Kids Corner or company circus. Anonymous insider, it's all just optics. Her chest tightened. She tapped one of the articles, her thumb trembling. An anonymous former employee had written a post accusing the company of being exploitative, using the story of Grace and her trial project as a marketing scheme. The words were sharp, cruel, and wrapped in the bitter confidence of someone who knew how to manipulate outrage. Worse still, by mid-morning, another article appeared, this time with leaked internal emails attached. Grace's name was right there in bold text, dragged into the mud of someone else's agenda. She sat frozen at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside her, while Lily played on the floor with her unicorn figurine. Every time Grace tried to read another line, her vision blurred. What if this ruins everything? What if they regret giving me a chance? What if this is how it all ends again? The phone rang. For a moment, she almost couldn't answer. But then she saw the name flash on the screen, Ethan Carter. His voice on the other end was calm, almost disarmingly so. Grace, I need you to come to the all-hands meeting at 4. I'll explain everything myself. She wanted to ask a dozen questions, to beg him for reassurance, but the steadiness in his tone stopped her. Instead, she whispered, "All right," and clutched the phone to her chest after the call ended, as though it might anchor her to something solid. By late afternoon, the entire company had gathered in the main hall, a cavernous space with a stage at the front and rows of employees murmuring anxiously. Grace slipped into the back, heart racing, while Ethan stepped forward alone. No spotlight, no teleprompter, just a folded sheet of paper in his hand. He looked out over the crowd, his jaw set, then began. I grew up with a mother who worked 2 jobs, he said, his voice carrying across the room. I watched her walk into interview after interview, only to be dismissed the moment someone learned she had a child at home. Doors slammed shut not because she lacked talent or ambition, but because people refused to see beyond a label. He paused, scanning the faces before him. So when I hear that one of our candidates, one of our best candidates, was rejected for the same reason, I cannot call that reality. I call it what it is, bias, and it has no place here. The room was silent. Every word seemed to press heavier than the last. Grace found herself gripping the edge of her chair, unable to look away. This is not a publicity stunt, Ethan continued, his tone sharper now. This is personal. This is about principle. Today I am signing a new corporate policy. Flexible schedules are no longer a privilege. They are standard. Childcare expenses will be reimbursed. And rejection based on parental status will not only be against company rules, it will be grounds for termination. A ripple went through the crowd. Surprise, disbelief, but also something else. Hope. Ethan didn't stop. And beyond policy, we are creating the Chance Fund. $10 million dedicated to supporting parents re-entering the workforce. This is not charity. This is investment. Talent doesn't disappear when someone chooses family. It grows. And I intend to prove it. At first, there was nothing. Then a slow rising sound. Applause, hesitant at first, then swelling until it filled the hall like thunder. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes, overwhelmed not just by the words, but by the fact that he had chosen to stand there, to stake his reputation, his wealth, his authority on something most executives would never touch. But even as the applause echoed, she noticed the shadows. A group of board members exchanged uneasy glances. The HR director, the same woman who had sat in the trial meeting, stood at the edge of the room with her arms crossed tightly, her expression grim. Later that evening, Grace learned she had submitted her resignation and convinced several of her team members to follow. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. Grace knew it. She could see the storm gathering even as Ethan walked off the stage, his folded paper still in hand, his eyes catching hers for a brief moment in the crowd. That look told her everything. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The week that followed felt like balancing on the edge of a cliff. The company was still buzzing from Ethan's announcement, half of the staff inspired and the other half unsettled, whispering about budgets, risks, and whether the CEO had lost his mind. Grace tried to block it out and keep her head down, focusing on her work and preparing for the next milestone, a high-stakes presentation to one of the company's biggest clients. Their contract was worth millions, and everyone knew that if the deal went south, the board would use it as ammunition against Ethan's new policies. And Grace, barely a week into her trial, was the one chosen to present the pilot results. On Sunday night, Grace sat on the floor with Lily, reviewing her slides while her daughter stacked block towers nearby. She rehearsed her pitch over and over until the words felt mechanical. She told herself she was ready, that the long nights of building the churn model and the graphs would pay off. She even dared to imagine what life might look like if she got the official offer. Steady paychecks, health benefits, maybe even saving enough to move out of their cramped one-bedroom apartment. For the first time in years, a different future seemed possible. But dreams have a cruel way of colliding with reality. On Monday morning, Grace woke to the sound of Lily coughing, a harsh, rattling sound that made her sit bolt upright in bed. When she pressed her hand to her daughter's forehead, she felt the unmistakable heat of a fever. Lily's cheeks were flushed, her eyes glassy. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "I don't feel good." Grace's stomach twisted. She glanced at the clock. It was barely 7 a.m. The presentation was in 3 hours. The client had flown in from across the country. There would be no rescheduling, no second chances. She pulled out her phone, staring at Ethan's number, her thumb hovering over the call button. Every instinct as a mother screamed to stay home, to keep Lily wrapped in blankets and cool washcloths, to whisper stories until she drifted back to sleep. But another voice, equally strong, warned that walking away now could ruin everything she had fought to reclaim. Her hands shook as she typed out the message. "I'm sorry. I can't make the meeting." "Lily is sick." She hit send before she could change her mind, then set the phone down, fighting the sting of tears. The reply came almost immediately. "You can. The meeting will be here at HQ. We'll make sure Lily is safe and close to you." "Trust me." Grace stared at the screen, her breath caught in her chest. She didn't know if she should feel relief or guilt. She wanted to believe him, but every fiber of her being resisted the idea of bringing her feverish daughter into the center of a corporate battlefield. Still, Ethan's words carried the same certainty as they had in the elevator the week before. Like he already knew she could do it, and he wouldn't accept any version of the story where she gave up. 2 hours later, Grace walked through the company's glass doors with Lily cradled in her arms. To her surprise, a small side room had been prepared. Soft rugs on the floor, a beanbag chair, coloring books, and a young woman with a gentle smile who introduced herself as a licensed childcare assistant. "Don't worry," she told Grace. "I'll stay right here with her." "You can check in any time," Lily, exhausted but comforted by the unicorn backpack still slung over her shoulder, curled up with a blanket and settled onto the beanbag. Grace crouched beside her, kissing her forehead. "I'll be right across the hall," she whispered. "You just rest, okay?" Lily nodded weakly, her small fingers gripping her mother's hand before finally letting go. Grace straightened her blazer, gathered her laptop, and walked into the conference room next door. The air inside was thick with anticipation. The client sat at the long table, flanked by assistants, their expressions sharp and unreadable. Across from them, Ethan leaned against the wall, arms folded, his steady gaze finding Grace the moment she entered. It was a silent reminder. "You belong here. Show them why." As she set up her presentation, Grace glanced once through the glass wall into the adjacent room. She caught sight of Lily curled peacefully on the rug, the assistant reading softly beside her. The sight filled her with a strange mixture of strength and vulnerability. Her child was close, safe, but also a reminder of the stakes. If she failed here, she wouldn't just lose a job. She would lose the chance to build something lasting for both of them. She took a deep breath, clicked the first slide, and began to speak. Every word mattered now. Every number, every graph, every ounce of confidence she could summon. And as the room focused on her, Grace knew this was the moment everything balanced on, the fragile line between collapse and triumph. Grace began her presentation with steady hands, her voice measured and confident. The slides glowed behind her, filled with charts, predictive graphs, and a live demonstration of her churn detection model. For the first 20 minutes, everything went smoothly. The client's executives leaned forward, nodding at the clarity of her logic, scribbling notes when she highlighted cost savings and retention curves. Grace felt herself settling into a rhythm, the kind of focus she had missed for years, when data analysis was her world and numbers bent to her will. But just as she advanced to the most crucial slide, the one showing the projected impact across a larger customer base, the client's lead executive's phone buzzed. He frowned, glanced at the screen, and muttered something to his assistant. The mood in the room shifted. He interrupted her mid-sentence, his tone suddenly sharp. "We've been following the coverage about your company." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. This so-called kid's corner. The press makes it look like a publicity stunt, a distraction. We don't want to invest millions in a partnership that turns into a sideshow. The words hit Grace harder than she expected. Her mouth went dry, her carefully rehearsed pitch splintering under the weight of doubt. She felt every eye on her, waiting to see if she would stumble. She thought of the sleepless nights, the feverish child across the hall, the way doors had slammed in her face for years. Was it all about to crumble again, dismissed as a gimmick? She took a breath, steadying herself. Instead of returning to the slides, she closed her laptop, the screen going dark. The room went quiet. "If you'll come with me for just a moment," she said softly, "I'd like to show you something better than numbers." There were startled glances, a few raised brows, but curiosity won out. Grace led them across the hallway, through the glass door into the room that had been transformed into the children's space. The atmosphere changed instantly. The fluorescent sharpness of the boardroom gave way to warmth. The colorful rugs, shelves of picture books, a basket of toys. And in the middle of it all sat Lily, pale but awake, stacking wooden blocks into a tower. The clients hesitated, unsure, until Lily looked up at them with wide eyes. She picked up a block and held it out toward the lead executive. "Here," she said with the seriousness only a child could muster. "Take this. Without it, the tower falls." The man chuckled awkwardly but accepted the block. "And what happens if I take another one away?" he asked, trying to play along. "It'll fall," Lily answered simply. "It always does." Grace knelt beside her daughter, looking directly at the clients. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of every rejection, every fight she had endured. "This tower," she said, pointing to the blocks, "is like our business. Each block represents a customer, a project, or a person. Remove one, and the structure weakens. Remove enough, and it collapses. My work is about keeping the tower strong, about seeing the weak spots before they break. But more than that, it's about people. Companies crumble when they forget the human side of what they build. And right now, too many towers fall because the people holding them up, parents, caregivers, are treated as expendable." The room was silent, the only sound the soft clack of Lily placing another block. Grace let the silence stretch, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Finally, the lead executive looked at Ethan, who had been standing quietly in the doorway the entire time, watching with an unreadable expression. "How long would it take to scale this system?" he asked. 6 weeks, Ethan answered without hesitation. The man nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "All right, you have a deal. And if you're looking for investors in that fund you mentioned, Carter, I think I've just been convinced." He glanced at Lily and added with a chuckle, "She's a better closer than half my team." Grace exhaled, her knees nearly giving out with relief. The clients shook hands with Ethan, their earlier skepticism replaced with genuine interest. One of them even crouched down to help Lily place the final block on her tower. Later that evening, Grace learned that one of the employees had filmed the moment on their phone. Not the presentation, not the spreadsheets, but the simple exchange with the wooden blocks. Within hours, the video was online, spreading like wildfire. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People weren't talking about a publicity stunt anymore. They were talking about a truth so obvious it was shocking. That business, at its heart, is about people. And when you remove those people, everything else crumbles. Grace sat in the quiet of her apartment that night, Lily asleep beside her, scrolling through the flood of messages. For the first time, the world wasn't laughing at her story or dismissing her as a liability. They were listening. And though she knew storms still lay ahead, she also knew something had shifted, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't belong because of who they loved or who they raised. The tower hadn't fallen. It had stood taller than ever. The offer letter arrived that same evening, sitting in her inbox like a promise she was almost too afraid to open. Grace stared at the subject line for a long moment before clicking. Senior Product Analyst. Official offer. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She read it 3 times just to be sure it was real. The salary was higher than she had imagined, the benefits generous, the flexibility written in black and white. Not a favor, not an exception. A real job. A door that had always slammed shut was now standing wide open. Within weeks, her life began to change in ways she hadn't dared to dream. She moved from the small one-bedroom apartment where she and Lily had shared a bed to a modest two-bedroom near a park. For the first time, Lily had her own room, painted light yellow, with unicorn stickers on the walls and a bookshelf already overflowing with stories. Grace furnished it carefully, piece by piece, watching her daughter twirl in the center of the room with a joy that filled every corner of her heart. At work, Grace quickly proved that the trial week hadn't been a fluke. Her dashboard became a cornerstone for the product team, and soon she was leading a group of 4 analysts. 2 of them were parents themselves, professionals who had been out of the workforce for years, but were given a second chance under the new policy Ethan had signed. Grace trained them patiently, remembering her own nerves, reminding them that their worth wasn't diminished by the gaps on their resumes. Together, they built something strong, not just in data, but in culture. The Kids' Corner, once a small pilot room, blossomed into a vibrant childcare center inside the company headquarters. Bright murals of forests and oceans covered the walls. Shelves were filled with books and toys, and certified caregivers greeted children each morning with warm smiles. On the door hung a brass plaque engraved with words that made Grace's throat tighten the first time she saw them. Lily's unicorn. Protection always on. Employees stopped calling it a perk. They called it a necessity. Grace began to notice Ethan more often too. At first, it was in professional settings, him stopping by to ask about her team's metrics or inviting her to strategy sessions where her input suddenly mattered. But then he began lingering after meetings, pulling out a chair across from her as Lily built block towers in the corner. He'd ask about her day, share a book for Lily, or tell her a memory of his own childhood with a mother who had fought battles no one saw. There was something unspoken in those moments, something that made Grace's chest tighten in a way both unfamiliar and comforting. One evening, after the office had emptied and the city's skyline glowed like scattered stars, Grace and Ethan found themselves alone in the conference room. Papers lay forgotten on the table, the hum of the city rising through the glass. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "For years," he said quietly, "I've been trying to collect the doors that slammed in my mother's face. Every policy I wrote, every change I pushed, it was all for her, even when she wasn't here to see it. But today, for the first time, it feels like we're not just opening doors. We're building something bigger. We're building a home." Grace felt the words settle deep inside her. She looked at him, steady, unflinching. "A home isn't just walls or policies," she replied. "It's where you can be yourself, without fear, where you don't have to worry about being pulled out of the tower." He smiled then, the same smile she had first seen in the elevator, warm and certain. The silence that followed was not awkward, but full of everything unsaid, full of the recognition that their lives had begun to weave together in ways neither had expected. Just then, Lily barreled into the room, her laughter echoing as she wrapped her arms around both of them. "Mom," she whispered in that secretive way children whisper when they want to be taken seriously. "Our unicorn did it." Grace knelt down, hugging her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "It did. But now it's up to us." That night, walking home beneath the city lights with Lily's small hand in hers and Ethan at her side, Grace realized something profound. The doors that had once slammed shut in her face were no longer locked. They had been pushed wide open, not just for her, but for the parents who would come after, for every person who had been told they were too much of one thing and not enough of another. And standing beside her, a man with dark hair and warm brown eyes, the millionaire CEO who had refused to look away, had proven that sometimes the most shocking thing in a world hardened by indifference is simple, unwavering kindness. Turned into action, that kindness was no longer just a story. It was a future. To me, this story is not only about romance or a fairy tale twist of fate, it's about justice finally catching up with prejudice. Grace's journey shows how much weight a single label like single mother can unfairly carry in a society that values constant availability over real talent. What makes the ending powerful isn't just that she got the job, or even that a millionaire CEO stood up for her. It's that her story cracked open a door for countless others who are told they can't belong because of family, circumstance, or vulnerability. The happy ending feels earned because it doesn't erase the pain she went through. It builds on it. Grace wins not by being rescued, but by proving that her resilience and skill had always been there, waiting for someone to see them. Ethan's role matters, yes, but the true heart of the story is Grace's persistence and Lily's quiet presence. The reminder that strength sometimes comes disguised as fragility. In the end, the story shocks in the best way possible. Not with scandal, but with kindness powerful enough to become policy, with empathy strong enough to become change. It leaves us with a simple, haunting question. What if more doors in the world were held open like that?